Okay, let's just get right into it. Today, we're doing an explainer on 5 deeply, profoundly disturbing real-life cases that are frankly going to completely challenge your understanding of human behavior. We've pulled all of this directly from the chilling records of these crimes to really figure out not just what happened, but the actual nitty-gritty mechanics of how it happened. We'll be looking at the cases of David Parker Ray, Colleen Stan, Junko Furuta, the Cleveland Kidnappings, and Sylvia Likens. We're going to break down the psychology of cruelty, the power of deception, and the unthinkable realities that can just hide right in plain sight. It's really about the exact methods perpetrators use to control people and the societal failures that let them get away with it.
Look, before we dive in, I really need to give you a quick but very serious heads up. These aren't spooky ghost stories, and they definitely aren't fictional urban legends. We are dealing with true, documented events involving some unimaginable cruelty. So because we're analyzing the extreme dark sides of human behavior here, viewer discretion is absolutely strongly advised. But if you're ready to explore the psychology and the societal breakdowns behind these events, let's proceed.
All right, Section 1. Monsters in Plain Sight. The ordinary people hiding dark secrets.
Take David Parker Ray, for example. To everyone living near him in New Mexico back in the late 90s, he was just a totally regular guy, the ordinary neighbor next door. But behind that perfectly normal, maintained facade was just a horrific reality. Psychologists call this the mask of sanity, where someone flawlessly mimics normal human behavior to hide some incredibly dark psychopathic traits. Beneath this mask, he was actually operating as the Toy Box Killer, which was a terrifying name based entirely around a customized, fully soundproof trailer sitting right there on his property.
Inside that trailer, authorities uncovered a massive cache of disturbing devices designed specifically to inflict pain. They figured out that Ray had kidnapped and abused multiple women over many, many years. But from a psychological standpoint, the scariest discovery wasn't even the physical tools, it was the audio tapes. Investigators found these tapes where Ray would painstakingly detail to his victims exactly what was going to happen to them. Actually, it wasn't just a physical threat, it was pure, calculated psychological destruction. By spelling out their fate, he just completely wiped out any glimmer of hope, establishing absolute psychological dominance before the physical abuse really even started. And because he was so terrifyingly good at hiding his tracks, we literally still do not know the full number of his victims today. It makes it one of the absolute most disturbing investigations in American history.
Moving on to Section 2, the psychology of captivity, control through fear and manipulation.
7. I want you to just let that number sink in for a second. That is the unimaginable number of years a young woman named Colleen Stan was kept captive. Back in California in 1977, she decided to accept a seemingly harmless ride while hitchhiking from what looked like a totally normal couple. Well, pretty much the second she got in that car, an absolute nightmare began. This wasn't just an abduction. I mean, an entire era of her life was stolen from her.
She was, unbelievably, forced to live inside a wooden box barely large enough for her body. But this case is a terrifying masterclass in extreme psychological manipulation, specifically a concept we call coercive control. Her captor didn't just lock her in a box physically, he locked her in psychologically. He convinced her that this massive, violent organization was watching her every single move and would go after her family if she disobeyed. This brought on a profound state of learned helplessness. That's when a person goes through repeated, unpredictable trauma until they truly believe they have zero control over their situation. So they just stop trying to escape, even if a door is literally left open. That fear built an invisible prison way stronger than the actual wooden box. The fact that she eventually broke through that mental conditioning makes her survival an absolutely unprecedented human story.
So hearing all this, you've got to wonder, right? How are so many warning signs just ignored? It's the most crucial question we have to ask when looking at these cases. How do these prolonged nightmares happen right under society's nose without a single person intervening? We have to look past just the perpetrator and the victim and really examine what happens when the entire community around them fails.
Which brings us to Section 3, when society fails. The tragedy of the bystander effect.
Let's shift over to Japan, 1988, for the truly heartbreaking case of 17-year-old Junko Furuta. She was abducted by a group of teenage criminals and put through extreme abuse for weeks, and she fought. She fought incredibly hard to survive, though tragically, she did eventually succumb to her injuries. But here is the detail that stunned Japan and still completely baffles criminologists decades later. Many people knew something was wrong, but failed to report it. The warning signs were there, Multiple bystanders, including the actual parents of one of the captors, knew she was in the house. So why does this happen? Well, it boils down to the bystander effect and the diffusion of responsibility. When a bunch of people witness a crisis, everyone just naturally assumes, oh, someone else will step in. People rationalize the weird noises, or they prioritize their own comfort over an undeniable emergency. It creates this collective paralysis that, in Junko's case, cost a young woman her life.
Okay, let's take a breath because Section 4 is miracles of survival, finding light in the darkest places. Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, Michelle Knight. For years, these three women were held captive inside a house right in the middle of a densely populated Cleveland neighborhood by a man named Ariel Castro. He somehow kept them entirely hidden from the outside world. I mean, neighbors lived right next door. They had barbecues in the adjoining yards, and they had absolutely no idea what was happening behind those closed doors. Castro was a master at compartmentalizing. He presented this image of an ordinary, friendly musician to the neighbors while running a house of terror inside. But today, those three names don't just represent victims of deception, they are a worldwide testament to ultimate resilience.
Tracking this timeline, everything shifted in 2013. Even after enduring years of that same coercive control and learned helplessness we talked about earlier, Amanda Berry fiercely protected a tiny ember of hope. And when her captor slipped up and left an inner door unlocked, she took her chance. She miraculously managed to breach the house and scream to neighbors for help. Immediately after, the police arrived and rescued all three women, ending a literal decade of terror. And in the days that followed, this rescue rightfully amazed millions across the globe. It just goes to show that even after years of systematic psychological conditioning, the human will to survive can shatter the strongest cage if given just one micro-opportunity.
Finally, Section 5, the ultimate betrayal, the tragic cost of inaction. For our last case study, we're going back to 1965 to look at 16-year-old Sylvia Likens. Sylvia was placed directly in the care of a woman named Gertrude Beneszewski. Now, she was supposed to be safe, looked after by a responsible adult. But instead of getting protection, the caregiver became the monster. Sylvia suffered severe, escalating abuse that ultimately led to her deeply tragic death.
And you know, just like the Furuta case in Japan, this horrifying event raises some really profound, uncomfortable questions about us as humans. Several people witnessed what was happening but failed to stop it. But here's the thing. This wasn't just the passive bystander effect. This involved active groupthink and herd mentality. Gertrude Beneszewski didn't just abuse Sylvia on her own. She actually invited and encouraged her own children and a bunch of other neighborhood kids to participate. As the authority figure, she normalized the cruelty. She gave these kids permission to just turn off their moral compasses. By tapping into that dark side of group dynamics where people will do horrific things just to fit in or follow an authority figure, she turned a whole neighborhood of kids into active torturers. It remains one of the most heartbreaking cases in American history because it shows exactly how easily ordinary people can be coaxed into collective cruelty.
So, as we pull back and look at all 5 of these disturbing chronicles, the overarching takeaway from our source material is chillingly clear. Sometimes the most frightening monsters aren't fictional creatures. They're real people hiding in plain sight. From David Parker Ray's totally ordinary facade, to the invisible psychological chains around Colleen Stan, to the absolute tragic failure of neighbors to step up for Junko Furuta and Sylvia Likens, the true terror is often right next door. It relies on our own blind spots and our societal paralysis to keep operating.
We've covered some seriously heavy ground in today's explainer, looking at the nuts and bolts of human cruelty, deception, and the absolute awe of human resilience. Now, I want to turn it over to you. Which of these 5 cases shocked you the most? Which one really changed your understanding of human psychology or the dark side of group behavior? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. I'd love to see you guys discuss the sociological lessons we can pull from these tragedies. Stay safe out there, and seriously, never stop paying close attention to the world around you.